Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to tonight's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Nicola Batossi. I am CEO of Fertility New Zealand. Fertility New Zealand is a registered charity, and we have helped Kiwis build whānau for 30 years and supported them through that process in every way that we can. So we do that by offering information, such as through our website, support. We have support groups that run all around the country, and advocacy where we represent the voice of New Zealanders with fertility issues. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Before I hand over to Fiona and Ken, they will give a talk of about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box during the presentation, but I won't approve them until the end, and then Fiona and Ken will answer the questions at that point. There will be a recording available by Thursday through our Facebook page and website. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you tonight Professor Ken Daniels, who from the University of Canterbury, who's renowned for his work in the area of donor conception and surrogacy, and Counsellor Fiona McDonald from Fertility Plus in Auckland. Over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Thanks so much, Nicola. Welcome, Ken, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. In tonight's webinar, hopefully we'll touch on lots of issues around donor conception and surrogacy that will be of interest to you, but I guess I just wanted to say right at the beginning that I'm sure we won't get to cover everything that perhaps you'd hope we'd have time to discuss tonight, but Nicola will talk a little bit more at the end and invite suggestions for further discussions and things in the coming months. So this is just an initial discussion, but hopefully everyone will be able to take something away from tonight. So Ken, you've been involved in this area of work for over 40 years, and you've been working with individuals, couples and children, not to mention counsellors, embryologists, nurses, doctors. So you've got a wealth of experience, and I wondered, what are some of the key things from all of that work that you feel might be relevant to share with everyone tuned in tonight?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that we're able to have this session tonight, and I also welcome those of you who are tuning in to listen and take part and hopefully ask some questions or make some comments, because we're very happy to respond to whatever is put up for consideration. Yes, it has been a long, almost 45 years actually. Some of you will notice the grey hair as an indication of that. But one of the most important things that I've learnt in those 45 years is that it's confident and secure parents who make confident and secure families and children. And in a way, my goal has always been to try and help people to get to that level of confidence and security. And I'm concerned about the things that sometimes get in the way of us feeling confident enough about the way that we've built our family. And some of those things clearly we will talk about tonight. But if I have one goal for tonight, it's that you'll go away from the session feeling a bit more confident and more secure about the choices that you've made in terms of your family building, and that you may have some skills and thoughts to help you in terms of managing some of the issues that arise as a part of building a family in a different kind of way. Not a good way or a bad way, but just a different kind of way.
Thanks, Ken. Ken, I mean, you know, what changes have you seen during that time? What are some of the key things that sort of stand out for you in terms of options available for building families and, you know, I guess how people and how the community feels about, you know, different ways of forming family? What have you noticed?
I think the most central one is that when I started on this work, webinars didn't exist, but even if they had existed, people wouldn't have actually been tuning into them, because in the beginning there was a sense in which we needed to keep all of it secret and private, and that it was unhealthy to actually talk about these things. And, you know, some of the professionals involved actually encouraged that kind of view. And one of the words that keeps coming up is the whole notion of secrets, and that we get a little bit uncertain, I guess, when we are moving into a new kind of territory. And if we are moving into a territory which sometimes has a little bit of stigma associated with it, then, okay, let's keep that secret, let's keep it private. And I used to be concerned that when professionals from all fields, counsellors, doctors, nurses, used to say to patients, look, there's no need for you to talk to your children about this, they were in effect saying you should be ashamed of what you're doing. That was absolutely the opposite message that I really am committed to, because this is something that we should be proud about. I was talking to you, Fiona, earlier on about the fact that it has always stuck in my mind about a couple who had a birth notice in the paper, and they announced the birth of their child, and they said, and special thanks to the sperm donor who helped us have this child. And I thought that was absolutely great, that they were able to be proud of the fact that they had built this their family in this kind of way. But, you know, it's not easy to do that, and sometimes the pressures are very considerable. So let's have some discussion about some of those pressures. What are the things that stop us from being as open and frank and honest? Because basically it's all about healthy families, good well-being of the children and of the parents together. If I could go on for a moment.
Absolutely.
One of the things that has really struck me over the years is how many parents have said to me, how do I tell my child that we use donor conception? And I suggest to them that maybe there's a better way of thinking about that. It's not about telling your child about how he or she was conceived. It's really about telling them about how we as a family came to be. This is our family story. This is not about the child, because if we think about the child, we stand the risk, and I'm sorry to use a technical term here, but we stand the risk of marginalising them, potentially making them feel a bit different, where it's us as a family that are really buying into this, and this child then feels included. This is my story. It's our family history. And it's that kind of shift from thinking about the child to thinking about us as a family.
Absolutely. And I think that's true too in terms of talking to, you know, sharing the family story about surrogacy as well, Ken, isn't it? And I know that many people I talk to, you know, amazingly creative in terms of putting together, you know, special books too, that this is our family story, and kids love those and love sharing those with other people who are important to them. But it's that, as you say, it's that the family story, not a, you know, disclosure of something that's just relevant to that child and presenting it in that way. Yeah.
And there's another aspect of that which you've just highlighted, and that is that if we talk to our children about, you know, you're a special child, for example, we miss the point in many ways, because it's not the child that's special, it's we as a family that's special, if you want to use that term special. I personally I wouldn't use that. But a lot of people feel comfortable with that. But it's us as a family that are different or special in the sense that we were built in a different way than some of the families that they might encounter at school.
Kim, sometimes people do ask me, why is it important? Why is it important for a child to know that full story? So,
well,
you've touched on some of those things, of course, already.
I want to tell you about a piece of research that I've recently done here in New Zealand, and which has just been published in a book that is being published overseas. And it was a study of 21 adults who were all conceived as a result of donor conception, in fact, donor insemination. And I'm sorry, I'm not talking about surrogacy at the moment, but I'll come back to that later. And the message that came out from all those people, incidentally, they were aged between 19 and 41. So quite a range of people, all of whom regarded themselves as New Zealanders. And what came out of that was that they felt that their family was very, very important to them, but that they needed to know that the donor had been a part of their life and their beginnings and so on, and that they wanted to know, some of them wanted to know, where do I get this nose from? And where do I get this sense of humour from? And all sorts of questions like that. But there was a sense in which there was a bit missing. And that bit was the genetic connection with somebody who seemed to be a bit of a mysterious figure, not somebody who they were involved in or with or knew much about. And all of them said that, in fact, donor offspring should be able to have access to information about the donor. But they kept saying, look, there's nothing wrong with our family. There's nothing wrong with our parents. Because we are interested in this, it's not because we are dissatisfied with our parents. It's just that there's a bit of me that I don't fully know or appreciate. And I would like to be able to access that. But, one of the scary parts of all of this was that some of them said in that research, I can't really talk to my parents about this because they're not very happy about it, or they don't feel comfortable about it. So I don't talk about it much, but I want to talk about it. And that's sad to me, but in fact, our children can't talk to us about the things that are important. They were picking up that there was a lack of confidence and security amongst some of their parents, and they wished that it wasn't like that. They wished that they could have that additional bit of information. And as I say, it wasn't because they were dissatisfied with their families, quite the contrary. Most of them were very enthusiastic about their families. And some of them talked about the fact that, it takes a lot more to be a father than to have the right genes. It takes love, and it takes commitment, and it takes involvement with me in doing my homework at the various times. That's what it means to be a parent. But that doesn't mean to say I don't have any interest in the donor. They're not looking for a replacement.
So they sound like they were very clear about who's who in their lives again. As you say, just wanting complete the picture and the puzzle, and have all the pieces and all the information there so that they can feel confident and just confident in themselves and who they are and where they're going.
And I mean, I think most of us would be able to understand that. I'm the father, my wife and I are the parents of adopted twin daughters, and they had the same kinds of questions. It's not as if they wanted a different set of parents, or maybe at times when they got a bit frustrated with us, they might have wanted a different set of parents when we said no and they wanted us to say yes. But the other part of it was that there was a part of their background and their beginnings that was not satisfied until they had met the birth mother and the birth father. And this was a very important experience for them. As one of them said on one occasion, shortly before she was meeting her birth mother, her friend said to her, well, how are you going to feel about meeting your mother? Her response was, she's not my mother. My mother is here and she's with me. She's the person who has loved me and cared for me. This is another person who is important but has a different kind of meaning.
Sharing that. Most of it, certainly from my practice experience, Ken, and what the research tells us, is not only important for children and for people to know about, a donor helping to create their family or a surrogate, but that it's important or ideal for them to know just in a very natural way from a really young age, so that they don't even look back and remember, yes, this is when I was told. And I guess there are some parallels, yes, to the adoption literature and experience as well, of course. So I think a lot of the time when I'm talking to individuals and to couples, they're quite surprised if I start talking about even as young as sort of, 2, 3, 4, to start, sharing the family story. So yeah, what are your comments around what age is, to start talking?
I go back even further than you. I think when the child is in utero, when you're pregnant with this child, to actually start talking to the child then, because it's not as if the child can understand, of course, but you are starting to get used to the language and the notion of sharing this. And again, it comes back to that confidence thing, that if you are more confident, then in fact you will communicate this to your children. So I'm not suggesting that it's only at that stage, of course, but I think the critical thing is that sharing information about your family history is an ongoing process. It's not something that I do it today and that's the end of it. I've done my duty and fine, that'll be the end of it. And so many times I've been involved with families who have felt that they only need to say it once, that's it. But in fact, children learn at different stages and in different ways. And we need to introduce the stories of our family and our beginnings in a way that is understandable. One of the problems here, though, is that I think many parents actually project onto the children what in fact they are feeling, and the fact that they think a child will be confused by this. But in fact, children don't get confused by simple information. It's us that feel that they might be confused by this. So I would be encouraging parents to talk about, or if it's just a single parent, to talk about the issues of the family building and to use opportunities. I mean, if there's something on the television, if there's a cousin that's having a baby or whatever, use the opportunity to actually start to talk about the fact, well, this is how it's happening for them. But some families are built in different kinds of ways. And we were like that. And that might be all that's necessary at that stage.
Yes.
And you wait for the questions to come and the information to be sought.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we were talking earlier, and so many times I've been talking with people who, really and understandably felt quite anxious about having maybe an initial discussion around these things, and have found it, has been quite anxiety provoking for them, and they've been quite stunned with perhaps their child's response has been, oh, okay, that's fine, that's nice. What's for dinner? So it's been quite a But as you say, it's not a one-off conversation. It's just just sharing that information about the family, and making sure that kids know that they can come back to it whenever they like, and making sure that feels like an open invitation for them to do that.
I think that's one of the exciting things about this webinar, and the fact that Fertility New Zealand is now actually has this large group of people who are interested in learning more about this. As I said, this wasn't in existence a few years ago, and it was for that reason that I actually wrote this book, Building a Family with the Assistance of Donor Insemination. And what's in this book is the stories of other parents and their journeys and the stages that they went through and the issues that they faced and some of the things that they had to deal with, often without much support or much understanding. And what is exciting about this is that now on the web and through this group, for example, there's the opportunity to share with other people, to hear their stories and to say, oh, I don't think that quite fits with me. Or, yes, that rings a bell. That might be the way for me. These might be the words that I could use, etc. And I need to come back to the statement that's on the front of this book, which was made by a man in Melbourne that I interviewed, because the people in this book are from all around the world as part of my research. And he said, it wasn't our ideal way of becoming a family, but it is our ideal family. It wasn't our ideal way of becoming a family, but it is our ideal family. Now, I think that's the goal that we should all be working to, whether it's surrogacy or donor conception, embryo donation, because what we want this to be is our ideal family. And we need some help probably in getting to that point. And a webinar like this, the Fertility New Zealand, is a way of doing that. Also, counsellors in clinics should be available as resources as well.
Absolutely. And there are lots of good books too, Ken, aren't there now, apart from your book, of course, which I still recommend to everyone very highly. But books to use as tools for talking with children. So there are books suitable, little picture books about all different kinds of ways of building families. So there are books that are applicable in single mum families, two dad families, two mum families, heterosexual couple parents. And, I think they're really great as well, just to be able to use, as I say, as tools with, to start the conversations with children. So Fertility New Zealand have a list of those kind of resources as well, and I'm really hoping that those listening will also share. I'm sure that there are lots out there that I haven't seen or heard of as well that would be wonderful to share with others. Just to get ideas about the words and how to explain different aspects of donor conception and surrogacy. Yeah.
But Fiona, I'm concerned that we've been doing a lot of talking here, and I really want this to be an interactive session in which you can put questions to us or make comments about the things that we've been talking about and sharing, so that it really is all of us taking part in this. And we've got this system whereby questions come up for us, and you'll have to excuse us, but we have to put our glasses on to read the questions because they're quite small.
Okay. So what about have a question here?
Can viewers read the question as well?
Yes, I believe so. Okay. Can yes. So what about close known donors, for example, sister as an egg donor, and the dual roles of aunt and genetic mother, and cousins, half siblings? In New Zealand context, can we learn anything from whānau adoption in terms of communicating about and managing these dual roles?
Well, certainly we can. And I think the move towards having what is often called known donors, and of course in surrogacy, there is the known component there.
Yes.
So
yes. Often it is a family member.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also in embryo donation now, in the way that it works here in New Zealand, then in fact you will be getting to know the other people who have been involved and who have helped you. So I think, yes, there is a great deal that we can learn, but I think sometimes there's a little bit of uncertainty about moving in this direction and how confident we can be.
Yes.
But I think the move towards using known donors is a very positive one, because then it's all open, it's all transparent. There's not the same sense, and for a same-sex couple who have a child, then the explanation can be that much simpler. I mean, the couples that I talk to who have had a child actually say, well, we don't have the issue to deal with like some of them in the donor conception area do.
Absolutely can. And I think, certainly from my experience, family members being donors and surrogates is getting more and more common all the time. And I think that there's a whole lot of you've got access to all that information and the history that you often don't get in other scenarios of donation and surrogacy, and that trust and that confidence. I'm just wondering, and coming back to the question, I'm just wondering how important is the language and terminology, I guess, used when talking about family building to children, Ken, because I wondered whether there's a little bit of concern about whether children will be confused about, particularly if they know the donor or the surrogate or they're a close family member, what the role of that person is in their life. So what would you say about the use of language? And
very important to get some clarity about this, because but also to bear in mind that children will use the language that feels appropriate to them. But on the other hand, they will also learn from us as adults. I have always had concern about the term mum and dad and when these should be used. I mean, for a child growing up, mum means the person who's changing the nappies and getting the food and looking after them, and dad changing the nappies and doing the food. Not want to be clear about the gender issues here, and that this is mum and dad, and to actually start to use that same word for another person that they can't necessarily identify with or they don't know, I think is potentially confusing for a child. So I would suggest that using those terms is not helpful. I think when it comes to donors, the people that I've talked to who have decided to use the name of a donor, and of course if it's a known donor, you can use the name of that person, but that actually identifies them as a person rather than an unknown kind of figure or a donor, etc., which may have different kinds of meaning for a child as it might have for us as adults. So I think we have to be very careful about the use of language. I mean, some people have actually talked about using analogies such as, I'm trying to think of the example of peas that are growing and kind of using language that I don't think is very helpful. I mean, why can't we use the reality? Because if, in fact, you are using some kind of terminology that the child then has to adjust to later, it's a challenge for them.
Absolutely. And I guess the language used to describe relationships, it doesn't have to I mean, an aunt is an aunt, whether they've donated the eggs to help, create that family or not, from the child's point of view, I mean, and I guess the terminology used, particularly with young children, doesn't need to try and explain the whole way the family has come together.
I mean, talking to a child about genetic connections when they are 3 or 4 years old is probably going to go way over their head. I mean, it will have no kind of meaning. So again, the notion of genetics or blood ties, etc., is for later when people are asking questions and wanting to discuss it in more detail. I see we've got another question.
Yes. Okay. So how do you discuss with your child who the donor family is if you have a relationship with them? So the person posting this question has a 2-year-old daughter, and their family was built with the help of some embryo donors, and they have ongoing contact with the donor family, and are using the term sister cousins and to explain, and brother cousins, to explain to the child the relationship between herself and the children in the donor family. So yeah, what do you think, Ken, about that terminology? Do you think that might potentially be a bit confusing, because particularly for a really young child?
Yes, it could be, but I'd like to go back one step, as I may, because what lies behind this question is very interesting, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me as if these people are saying, what does this mean for me in relation to this child? Because it's embryo donation, what about talking with the other family? Because you talk about a good relationship that's developed, and the children from the parents that donated the embryo are older. So what are they explaining to their older children? Yes. And you need to be on the same page in terms of using the same kind of language. And it may well be that in talking with the other family, they have come up with some other ideas that could be very useful. And yeah, as I say, agreement is a good idea if you can possibly get it.
Absolutely. And so again, it's, as you say, it's helpful for all the adults involved to have a bit of a consensus of the terminology and the language that will be used to start with, and then in time, if the children decide to use different language to describe their relationship with each other and their families' relationships together, then so be it. But helpful just to start with
exactly
sort of a team consensus by the adults.
But there's another interesting part of this question. Sorry to be dissecting it, but it's a very good question and a very useful one in terms of helping us to explore some of these issues. You actually used the phrase, she is not genetically related to us. I would suggest that whenever we use the terminology she is not, then we are into potentially a negative kind of perspective. So that rather than saying what is not, we're saying what is. And not genetically related is actually saying that there is something that is different, but not necessarily in the positive way that it could be. And so I would suggest thinking about that language in a different kind of way. And if you want to use that, I think there is a problem, as we talked earlier, about using the phrase genetically related, because that's a level of understanding that is maybe more appropriate to a 9 or 10-year-old rather than a young child. But rather than saying you're not genetically related, you're talking about we are a family. And we came to be as a family because of love and caring and wanting you, etc. So that you're emphasizing the positives. It's actually taking a proactive kind of approach rather than a reactive one.
Absolutely. And, kids are very intuitive, Ken, aren't they? And it's not, there's not going to be a wrong way to share your family story with your child or children. And, kids, as I say, they're very intuitive. They know that you love them and wanted them very much, and they will know that whatever words come out when you're talking about it. Yeah.
And that's absolutely right. But I want to add a word of caution there, because, if a child picks up that there's some discomfort or disease, as I would put it, in how the parents are using the language or talking about this, they will pick that up very quickly, and they will signal in their mind, what's here? There's something. They won't be able to work it out probably, but certainly in the experience of those people that I was talking about before who were part of this research, they often sensed that there was something that wasn't quite right, that it wasn't being open and so on. And so, again, my suggestion is that this can often be reflected in differences between the parents, if there are two parents. For example, the male feeling one way and the female, or the two females feeling differently, or the two males. And the thing is that if, in some of the early research that I was involved in here in New Zealand, that if in fact the couple aren't on, when there's two, aren't on the same page, then in fact that will cause or potentially cause some discomfort and for the child. So it's absolutely critical for me that the parents actually come together and have a good level of understanding. And I'm sorry to quote some other research, but in some work that I was doing in Germany, and we had couples who were considering using donor insemination, what became very obvious was that the parents were often in quite different positions. And the most critical part of having a weekend course was that they actually came to understand each other. They came to communicate about the issues that they had been struggling to communicate with on their own, etc. And it was then that they were in a position to go forward with confidence.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Thank you. Ken, there's another question. So the next question is, would you recommend making contact with a clinic donor and meeting and possibly having occasional visits? I know our donor is open to this, but we feel a little bit tentative when we would start this process. Our toddler is now 20 months and hoping for a second child soon. I mean, yeah, I guess in reading that, I would say that if everyone's open to having a meeting, it usually only bodes well for longer term contact and sharing of information and basically, meeting the child's needs. And often I think people feel a lot more comfortable even and a lot more relaxed after it's, an in-person meeting. I think it's wise to definitely, have that facilitated by the clinic. So you're sort of on neutral territory and you have that support there. But I think it's sort of often people who've met the donor, say that they feel it was really helpful to put a face to the person. It just kind of demystified a lot of it for them and they felt a lot more comfortable. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Ken?
I would ask the question, who is wanting this meeting and for what purpose? And is the purpose associated with the child? And of course the child in this case is very young. So this is really something that is emerging in terms of the parents and the donor, and is a potential first step. I think I would be wanting to think pretty carefully about how those needs are met and at what stage a meeting might take place, whether the child would be present or not present, etc. So I don't think it's a straightforward issue of saying, yes, go ahead with the meeting, or no, don't go ahead with the meeting. Certainly if there is going to be a meeting to be facilitated, as you suggested, Fiona, by one of the counsellors. But I keep coming back to this question, who is wanting this and for what purpose? I'm not suggesting that parents have to deny their own feelings and their own wishes and all the rest of it, but one has to look at it in the context of building your family so that it is a family and capable and confident and secure, and then maybe when the child is at the point where they want to have some contact, that's the point at which the contact and meeting actually takes place.
And of course, with anything that we're discussing, it's so individual, really, isn't it, Ken? The decisions around all of this. And I think one of the things that is really important, if people are considering meeting their clinic donor, or whether either party, whether it's the donor or the parents who've requested or shown an interest in that, is to, as you're indicating, Ken, be really clear, I guess, about expectations and about reasons for wanting to consider meeting, and sometimes in the preparation for making decisions around whether to meet a clinic donor or not, I think it's helpful to actually write something down, write sort of a letter about what you would be hoping would happen, and you would come from having a meeting with the donor. So yes, it's not as straightforward, a simple decision, but as I say, I think often it can really just set some good foundations that will benefit a child and the whole family in future. And I guess we know from the research, Ken, don't we, that donors are interested. They don't just donate sperm donors or egg donors, or obviously not surrogates or embryo donors either, and just not think about and wish for the best for families. They do. They are interested to know how families are going.
And it's interesting when we consider embryo donation, because in embryo donation, the donating couple and the recipient couple actually meet together.
Yes,
and
it's a requirement.
I have to say that I was very involved in the development of that whole process. Now, why did we argue that, in fact, this was the appropriate way to go? Well, the basic reason was that if, in fact, this child is going to grow up knowing that they have full siblings in another family, that there is another set of parents, as it were, not parents who have been involved in their upbringing, but parents in terms of this was their embryo that they donated, then if those two sets of parents can't get onto the same page and onto the same wavelength about how they are going to manage the issues that will emerge in the future, it doesn't bode well for the child. And it's on that basis that if we are really concerned about the welfare and the well-being of the family and the child, then there is a need for those people to come together. That's an embryo donation. We haven't actually extended that so much into donor conception. We have extended it into surrogacy. So we're in an interesting position that we've moved some way towards that, but not completely.
Thanks. Thank you. So how are we going for time? We're okay at the moment. So some other questions that have come in. So what percentage of recipient parents disclose to their kids the truth about the nature of their conception? And then there's a little FYI about that question, that we are a two-mum family and use donor sperm. I believe that most people do intend to share their full story of how their family was formed with children. Obviously, in some families, a parent or parents are perhaps more likely to get questions or have those discussions sooner. So, for example, if single mum families, for example, or perhaps in same-sex couple families. So, but yeah, I think most people do set out to talk to children, and certainly more and more so, from a young age, and along the lines that we've been talking about tonight, Ken.
One of the interesting things is that the changes that have occurred over the last few years in terms of moving towards a family approach and towards openness and sharing of information and so on has been influenced very much by counsellors. And virtually all of the counsellors and the professional body of the counsellors are saying, yes, this is in the interest of your family to actually be open and sharing. And, you know, there's a funny thing about this. If we wanted to turn it into a moral kind of issue, we want to teach our kids about honesty and truth. And then if we live in a way that says, but I'm not going to be honest or truthful with you, you know, we're a bit of a tickling symbol, and you know, we're not really being genuine. So I think the issue of people coming to a clinic and seeing in surrogacy, embryo donation, and donor conception, and seeing a counsellor, almost all of the counsellors would be encouraging this kind of approach. And I'm not aware of hardly any people in New Zealand who are now saying, no, I'm not going to tell the child. They may have some concerns about when and how and so on. That's what this webinar is all about. But I think in New Zealand, we are very privileged that we have moved quite dramatically, partly because of counsellors, but also because of the legislation that now enables donor offspring, when they are older, to be able to access the information of a donor. And you know, this is a dramatic change, and is very different from places like America, where there is still the Wild West in terms of you know, whether in fact people are encouraged, whether they will tell or not tell, etc.
I think certainly within some cultures, Ken, it's particularly daunting still for a lot of people I speak with to talk about you know, sharing family story, not only with the child but with the broader family network. But I think, you know, even their, you know, attitudes are changing, you know, over time, but that can be particularly daunting, I think, in some cultures.
But very interesting that you use that, Fiona, because I think it's a very valid point. But you know, the culture in New Zealand was to be secretive. It's changed. So if the culture in New Zealand could change, it can change in relation to other families as well.
Absolutely.
And I've just I remember in a panel discussion that we had at a conference where I interviewed 5 young people who had been conceived as a result of donor insemination, and one of the mothers was in the audience. And people started asking her, about 200 professionals involved, they started asking the mother, but how did you feel about all of this? And I'll never forget the fact that she said, I was so relieved. It was like a big black blob in my head that was there all of the time. I was concerned that I was not being honest and truthful with my children, and that you know, this would be a disaster. And she had come to the point where she realized that she had to manage this with her 2 daughters, and it was such a relief for her.
Yes, absolutely. The burden of secrets is a heavy one to carry.
Well, I don't think there's such a thing as a secret. You know, secrets have a habit of coming out, and coming out at a time which is pretty unhelpful and sometimes very, very damaging to people.
Absolutely. And I guess, you know, particularly in this day and age, isn't it, with, you know, with the way we're linked to within the world and into the world with, you know, Facebook and you know, DNA home testing kits and all of that. It's you know, I guess it absolutely leaves weight to, you know, having those conversations at home with your parent or parents and knowing your full story from a young age.
Yeah, and that's another very important point that you're making too, that the conversations are not just with the child, but with your family, so that the family can be supportive of you. I don't know how many parents I have met who've said, oh, my parents would react very negatively if they knew. When they have finally got to the point of sharing with the parents have been very supportive. But their fear was that they would react in a negative way.
Yes. And sometimes, quite often actually, people will talk to me about feeling that they need to maybe wait and talk to the child and share the story with the child, as you know, at whatever age they're thinking, before telling the rest of their immediate family network. But I think, you know, there are a lot of advantages, aren't there, for the parent or parents as well as the child, for that being shared with you know, the close family and friends, at least at an earlier stage, because then, as you say, the parent or parents can have support and be able to talk openly and, you know, have support through all of that. But also for a child, when a child, you know, is, you know, learning about their family story, they'll want to share it. And you know, and why not? And so I guess it will give people like grandparents and aunties and uncles, you know, if they've had the heads up on all of this, you know, they'd be able to respond and have time to respond. And
I hope I'm not being too challenging when I say this, but I think parents have a marvellous opportunity to actually educate their parents and their family about what's involved in this whole area, and to lay out what their expectations are. What do we want from you? What do we expect from you? Because a lot of people of that generation may not understand, may not know how to be supportive, may not have the language to use, etc. And so I say challenging because it means that the parents of a child are moving into a proactive role and sort of saying, we are confident enough, we have made this decision, and we want you to know about this because you are part of our family.
Absolutely, Ken. And it's okay to say to family, isn't it? Look, you know, we're sharing this with you. We're, you know, this with you, but you know, we will talk to the child. You know, we will share the story with them. So we're sharing this with you now, but you know, it will be for us to share with the child. So it's that's possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ken, I'm just looking at the next question. So this question here, so you're talking about donor-conceived adults who wish they knew more about the donor. Do you think things are changing with more recent donations in that the relationships are a lot more open now?
Certainly.
Yeah, for sure.
Very, very much so.
For sure.
And what's changing, of course, is that the parents are being much more open with the kids. So they're growing up with this knowledge. I mean, the frustration for a number of these people in the study was that they discovered this information when they were teenagers or young adults, and they were very angry for a start. And it took a while for them to come around because this is information that's relevant to me. Why is it be hidden from me? Why are you keeping these kinds of secrets?
Absolutely. So that impacted on their relationship with their parents.
And for some of those people, there was a time when relationships were pretty rocky as a result of that. But all of the people in the study said, it's come around now and we're back on the same page.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another question. So these are all really great questions. Thanks so much, everybody. Do you have suggestions for talking to non-donors' children, particularly if they're older, say age 8 to 10, when disclosure happens? And I guess this is something that often comes up in my discussions with people, is that you know, most commonly the donor or the surrogate's children actually will be older than the anticipated and hopeful child. And so it may be that even if it's not originally planned, actually, that the donor may want to talk to their child or children, or the surrogate may want to, before the recipient family or intended parents have had a chance to share the story with their own child. It kind of by necessity, through questions from, you know, the donor or surrogate's own children. You know, I guess surrogacy is a little bit different. That's going to be an earlier discussion, but it may be that the donor feels that they, you know, do want to talk to their own children sooner rather than later.
Yes, and I would encourage that, because I think, again, it's the children growing up with that knowledge, rather than being confronted with it at a stage where it's too late. You know, somebody once wrote, "A child should never be able to remember a time when they did not know." A child should never be able to remember a time when they did not know about the family history. And that, I think, is a lovely goal. That applies to known donors as well as to the families.
I think sometimes the fear, like, is that you know, if the donor, say the donor's children are older than the recipient's children, that information may sort of unwittingly come out, you know, but that can be worked around. That can be.
I take the view that there's no issue that is insurmountable. The issue is how do we deal with it, and how do we manage it in a way that is sensitive to everybody's needs, but also honest and open and helpful.
Yeah. And again, coming back to what you made earlier, Ken, too, you know, people talking to each other, the adults talking to each other about, you know, when they're going to share that information with the children, so that people have the heads up and you know that that's happening and are on the same page. And I guess being open to the fact that, you know, sometimes the timing might need to change than it had been originally anticipated. Being flexible with that. Okay, so thank you for your feedback. I have a 1-year-old conceived by an egg donor. My partner and I have been very open with family, friends, close work colleagues, etc., about our son being donor conceived. There have been a few times, and there will be more, when I might get a comment or question from someone we're not close to about how my son has no smile, or does he get his blonde hair from me. Once I is older and has a better understanding of how we became family, what's a good way of responding to such comments? I wouldn't want him to think I was avoiding the comments or embarrassed by the question. If I don't somehow acknowledge he was donor conceived, but also I'm not sure what a conversation that I need to have with, say, a checkout operator or my dentist.
I think the same thing about the dentist, that you probably can't talk anyway.
Very good.
But
people do kind of make the darndest comments, don't they? And
you know, one of the big things in our society is that we look for likenesses. When you see a newborn baby, people sort of say, "Oh, doesn't he look like his father or his mother or whatever?" I think there's a sense in which there's a need to know. You want to share information with people who are important to you, but people who are, as it were, passing in the night, as it were, I mean, I wouldn't be telling them about my relationship with my wife, for example. If they ask what's your marital relationship like, I'd sort of say, well, that's not appropriate for you to be asking that question. But I see what I'm trying to get at. But in fact, I think the sharing is with people who will understand, or we will help them to understand, and people who it's important for them to know. I don't think the casual kind of encounters. So my response is to somebody who says, "He's just got your smile," and you say, "Yes, isn't that lovely?" And that's it. That's the end of the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Yes, I was going to say it's certainly handy to have some ideas up your sleeve, that, you know, of sort of things you can just roll off the tongue. In response to comments and questions like that. Okay. So another question. So does New Zealand have donor insemination courses like Germany does, or the like? For people, couples that are wanting to learn, go down the sperm donor path.
No, but I think you're making a very positive suggestion to Fertility New Zealand. And I think what was important about those sessions in Germany, and I was involved in running them with a female colleague, and it was very important that there was a male and female involved, because that meant that the participants could identify with me as the male or with Petra as the female. But the important thing about that, I think, is that Britain has now picked that up, and the Donor Conception Network are following exactly the same model that we developed in Germany. I think there is a need for that here in New Zealand, and I think I would love to see it developing, because the research from those courses in Germany and the research from the ones in Britain were just so positive. They were an educational development of confidence kind of approach.
Yeah, look, absolutely.
So I think you should be just digging Fertility New Zealand along. Actually, there's one other thing about that. The courses in Germany and in Britain were not attached to clinics. And I think that was actually quite important. Nicola's going to tell us that we have to finish. It was very important that they were independent of the clinics.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you. It's a fantastic discussion. I've actually just come on to say that we still have quite a lot of questions. There's about 8 or 10 questions waiting, so we could sort of call it there, or maybe have an extra 10 minutes. It's 9 o'clock already.
I think you're telling us to be briefer.
Is it quick fire Q&A, or are you happy to keep going, Fiona and Ken?
I'm happy to keep going for another 10 minutes if that's okay with everyone, but yeah, we'll try and be more succinct. Thanks, Nicola. So, yeah. So, sorry.
Yeah. Just saying to people who posted a question, there's a couple that are a little similar. So if I don't approve your question, it's because it should be covered by.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola. And maybe also, if it's okay with you, Ken, if we can't, even in the 10 minutes, get through all the questions, Ken and I can collaborate and maybe respond via you to people. Nicola, if that's all right.
That'd be great. Okay.
Thank you.
One fascinating thing was that in talking about this beforehand, we were all wondering a little bit, will people actually write in with questions? And here we are being overloaded with them. And I think that really indicates the fact that this is a marvellous opportunity to share and interact and so on. And congratulations to Fertility New Zealand for organising this.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
So, do many people have donors with distinctly different ethnicities to the recipients? So, look, in my experience with donation, it's still more common than not that people do tend to match up or request to be matched up. Donors and recipients of the same or similar ethnicities, but not always. But that's still the most common scenario, and most people, I guess, explain, if you like, that, for want of a better term, that preference to me in terms of them feeling that it's in the bed. They feel it will be easier for a child to feel, part of that family if they look similar.
Yes, I recall a Maori family who couldn't find a donor, and the clinic didn't have any donors available. So they accepted a Pacific person, a donor from Pacifica. And, that I could understand completely. I think sometimes when it's a more dramatic change in terms of the physical appearance and so on, that raises another set of issues which can be managed, no question about that. But the parents need some help to think about how they're going to manage.
Absolutely. Just, yeah. Thanks, Ken. Okay, so we want to be very open about our family story. At this point, our close friends and family are aware, but we're concerned that maybe it's not our place to tell others, and it should be our child's choice who he or she would like to tell. What are your thoughts on the level of openness we should have with regard to our family story?
well, I get a sense from the question that there's a desire to be open and frank. If you asked yourself the question later on, is your child going to resent the fact that you talk to your friends and your family or not? And I suspect that the way you handle that will determine whether they are happy that you shared that. And if it's shared on the basis that this is our family, we wanted to be proud of it, we wanted people to know, and that seems to me to be an acceptable approach to take.
Absolutely. And again, a couple of points you made earlier, Ken, you know, it's great then because, you know, parents can talk openly and have support through, you know, their journey as well, if close family and friends are aware, and also close family and friends having the heads up will eventually benefit the child too, because then the child can go to them and share their story, share their family story, and, you know, they'll know what they're talking about. And I've even talked to some families who, you know, who have perhaps at the appropriate time they've felt, you know, given the child's kindy teacher or school teacher the heads up that, you know, sharing their family story, and, you know, children have gone off as proud as punch with their family story book for class news the next day, and it's been helpful that the teachers can give a bit of a heads up. So I think that's, although it may seem a little bit counterintuitive in some ways for a parent or parents, it's actually, I think, really tends to benefit the whole family having that shared.
Oh, yes, very much so. And sorry, I want to digress for a moment. I was giving a lecture at the University of Canterbury to about 120 first-year students, and I was talking about donor insemination, and one of the students had asked if they could bring their son into the class because he was unwell and couldn't go to school that day. And when I said about donor insemination, this 8-year-old, he put up his arm and said, "I'm donor conceived." And, you know, he was confident and secure, and this was something that he was proud of, that he could identify with in a very positive way. So, no, I think that those are the changes that are really exciting and making for much healthier family functioning.
Absolutely, Ken, yeah.
But sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to say. I can put a different hat on for a moment. You know, when you talk to your friends about what you're doing, there's always the potential that you might find that they are interested in becoming donors. And given that there's a shortage of donors in New Zealand, and everybody's saying, how do we get more donors, etc., well, you know, you're probably the best people to be the advocates and the advertisers for the need for donors.
Very true. That's good. Thanks again.
The clinics are paying me for that.
No, not true. Okay, so the next question is, or comment is, currently sperm donors are not able to initiate donor linking. Do you think this could or should change? So actually, donors can approach the clinic and say, "Okay, I'd love to, you know, meet the family and see how they're going, or, you know, find out a little bit more information, share a letter or an update." So that's fine. And if a donor does approach us wanting that sort of donor linking, we would always, you know, contact you and talk that through with you, give you time to think through the implications of that and what it might mean for you and for the whole family. But basically anything's negotiable as long as all parties are feeling happy to proceed. Absolutely a donor can initiate the donor linking. Obviously not directly with you, you know, if you come to the clinic, but yeah, they can, and sometimes they do. Yeah.
And, you know, in the donor linking work that I have been doing over the last few years with adults who've been conceived and being started in this way, has only been once that I or the clinic that I've been working with has gone to a donor who previously wanted to be anonymous, only once has the donor come back and said, no, I'm not prepared to have any contact. In all of the other cases, if the process is handled appropriately, there is an understanding of the needs of the donor conceiving person.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess with your question, though, I mean, certainly in terms of the legislation and the donor register, you know, the ball is in the court of either the parent or parents or the young person themselves once they're 18 to make that decision about linking, you know, with the donor. It's not a, you know, that automatic right doesn't flow away. But yeah, and I don't know if that should change, but that's just my personal view. I think that's okay. The next question, what is an ideal age for a donor-conceived child to meet the donor? Would prior to adolescence be ideal in order to facilitate identity formation?
Simple. There is no ideal age. It will vary according to the needs of the child or young person. I think as they start to express an interest, and if they are feeling secure in their own family identity, then they are wanting to embrace another part of the family, if you like, because in a sense the donor is a part of the family, not in the sense of the nurturing and so on, but in the sense of they have a place and
the family story.
Yeah, and so if, as I say, if they feel secure in their family origins and beginnings and are ready to reach out, then I think if you want an ideal age, that's it.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. Okay. So following on from your earlier comment, re a couple not being on the same page about how they feel, how would you recommend going about sharing with donor egg child? In this case, mum is happy to share and have the child know the donor, but dad wants nothing to do with it. It's very, very tricky.
I think that's where counselling is needed. And I mean, as a professional counsellor, that is the kind of situation that I would be exploring with those two, and how they can reach some kind of level of understanding and agreement.
Absolutely.
I don't think the one who wants to tell, battering the other one, is going to achieve it. It will only force them probably further into a corner and be resistant. But again, it's about exploring why, what's actually operating here. Why don't I want this to know? And if my experience is anything to go by, it's the fear that maybe this child will see me differently than what they had seen me previously. And I don't think that is the case.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with your comments, Ken. And I do think it is possible in situations like that to reach some common ground, and I think that can be done as long as all parties are willing to keep the needs of the child in the centre of everything and have that as the focus. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I think Nicola's signing us off.
I think Nicola is certainly just giving us wide up there. Thank you, Nicola. So Nicola's is putting up, yeah, great, some contact details there. And I was just going to say, again, please do let Fertility New Zealand know what you feel would be helpful. I don't think I mentioned earlier a couple of subjects that people have already mentioned, I think, to Nicola, that might be good would be having people talk about how they found a donor and a surrogate, what was important to consider when they're looking for those people to help them build their family, but also, panels of parents maybe talking about how they put together their family storybooks for their children and had those conversations. Just a couple of ideas that I know have come up already, but yeah, please do let Fertility New Zealand know what would be helpful.
And also, sorry, Nicola, Fertility New Zealand has mentors who are available to pick up questions on the Facebook page and so on and respond. And these are people who've been in the same kind of situation that others are currently in. So that's another resource that's available.
Absolutely. Thank you very much again, everybody, for all your questions and interactions. We're really hoping that this will be interactive as possible. So thank you so much. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise, Ken and Fiona. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that was a fantastic session. So thank you very much.
Bye for now.
A very enjoyable one too.
Great. And if you're not already a member of the Donor Conception and Surrogacy Network, please do join, sign up through Facebook groups. We'd be really pleased to welcome you into that group. So thank you very much again, Fiona and Ken, for your time tonight, and good night to everyone.
Thank you. Bye for now.